So tonight we're going to be talking about the peace offering. It starts out in Leviticus 3. And as we get into 3 and into 4 even, we'll start seeing a little differences of what's going on. And I've written it, or I've copied the King James Version down here for the verses. That's not what was in there. So if you read it in a New King James or something, it's going to be slightly different. But that's where that meat offering and grain offering came from, and one of the differences. So I try to go back to the King James Version, but sometimes it's not always the most accurate for today. And I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying the interpretation was a little different back then than what it is now. Verse 1, and if his oblation be a sacrifice of people. Who uses oblation, okay? That's what I'm talking about in the King James. If you have an oblation, no, this is a sacrifice. It's an offering, is what it is. And if his offering be a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offer it of the herd, whether it be male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. Now this is what they call a peace offering, and if you want to read down here in this particular, in the handout, summarizes it very well. This offering symbolized fellowship and peace with God through the shed blood. After some meat was ceremonially waved and given to the priests, worshipers and their guests could share in the feast as a meal with God. Up until this time, some of the offerings, as we've seen, were, some of it was shared and some of it was not, and we're getting ready to get into it. It's a little bit different. Some does not say. And later on, when we'll see that, they're making some assumptions from some of the historians that they did share it. And then some of them are just for the priests. Okay, some of the offerings that are given in. But in this one, in the peace offering, it's not to get peace with God. It's that you can enjoy the peace with God. And the fellowship, I think, says it better. It's a better word for it. That way you're in fellowship with the Lord. So you're able to sit down and have a meal with him. It's kind of like the way it's trying to represent. It's the same as far as the sacrifice. All the sacrifices need to be without blemish. And that means we give God our best. It also means it's a sinless substitute. And it points to Jesus, the perfect sacrifice, as we go through each one of these. The difference in this one is that it said it could be a male or a female. The previous ones, all of them were males, except the turtle doves, the pigeons. But these particular ones, it can be either one. So this peace offering, and there it just says, again, what I was saying earlier, peace offering was not an offering to make peace with God. That's the purpose of the sin offering. But an offering to enjoy peace with God. The whole reason Jesus made peace between the Father and the believer is so that the peace could be enjoyed. The greatest animal peace offering ever made was what happened when Solomon dedicated the temple, offering 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. And that's in 1 Kings. That's a lot of animals. That's a lot of blood. That's a lot of burning. That's a lot of everything. It says that must have been the history's greatest barbecue. I don't know if I'd call it barbecue. But later on it says Hezekiah gave a festival where 2,000 bulls and 17,000 sheep were given for peace offerings in 2 Chronicles. So, and these are just the peace offerings that it's talking about here, the animal peace offerings. But the greatest peace offering, of course, was when Jesus gave himself as a sacrifice for us. And that way, that made peace with God direct. And it's there for us, available, each one. As Paul said in Romans, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's the only way that we can. We can't go any other way except through him. Talks about the male and the female. That's one of the big differences here. Still, you have to lay your hands on the head of the offering. That goes like the sin offering and the other offerings that we've studied so far. And it's to identify or to substitute yourself with that offering that you're making, that sacrifice that's going. It says it's killing it at the door of the tabernacle. As with the burnt offering, the sense is probably, not certain, but that the Israelite bringing the offering actually killed the animal and it bled to death. Afterwards, the priest would collect the blood and sprinkle it around the altar. This happened at the door of the tabernacle at the very entrance. This was where the Israelites brought their sacrifice to the priests. The non-priestly Israelite did not go into the tabernacle court except here at the very entrance of the door of the tabernacle. Now, if you remember, you had that outside tent that was all the way around the tabernacle, what they called the tabernacle. And then what I would call the tent, that is a tabernacle. Okay, and there was a veil that separated that portion that they could go, that the priests could go into the first part, and that's the holies. And then inside of the covered tent was a second portion, that's the holiest of holies, or holy of holies. They didn't go in there except once a year to make atonement for the. But here, the person bringing the offering up is right there at the front of the curtain. It's not the door of the tabernacle. The priests do that. They take that and they go and the guy cuts it up and they help him and they skin it, do all that stuff, and they take the animal and then they go put it on the altar of the burnt offering, which is right before the tent or the tabernacle. Should have brought our little drawings that we had of that. And he shall offer, but y'all read Brother Epperson, 3, 4, and 5.
And he shall offer from the sacrifice of the priest offering an offering made by fire to the Lord. The fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails.
Go ahead and 4 and 5.
The 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidney, he shall remove. He, you know, if that we were still under that, we would be the ones. And Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is on the wood that is on the fire, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. Does this have to be done by men, or, I mean, it uses he, okay?
It talks about he a lot, and I believe it's always the male of the family, whether it's the son, and if what happens, okay, is if they are widowed, then they go back usually to their family, or they try to find someone, they try to get another person, marry another person, because that's what they do. They talk about if a woman, husband died and they didn't have a son, she married again, or the brother would take her as her to try to have a son for him. So it's not saying that the woman didn't have status, it's that they were unprotected. So they would try to get them protected. Now, it doesn't go forward with that and doesn't tell us anything about that. Now, some of the offerings that we've talked about so far are for the whole congregation. And we'll talk about it here in 4. So the offering that's given is for the whole congregation. So they are covered. But it does require the men to go up to the temple 3 times a year. That's what it says. And of course, it's in most of the time they bring their family. It's just that the family doesn't go up. Now, what I've seen and read a little bit about it is they would, just like Jesus, when he was 12, he went into the temple and he was one. I think that, and I've heard it, not just me, but I've read part of it, that they would bring the young men, once they got to age 12, 13, somewhere, they had their bar mitzvah, or whatever they called it back then, I don't know if it's the same thing, and they would watch to learn, because they've been reading it and studying it for the first 12 years of their life. Now they're starting to see it. So I think that's part of it. They are covered as a family. Same thing with when Moses left Egypt. Each family took it. Now the man was the one probably did the killing. The woman took the meat and then she cooked it. That's just the way it was set up. So it doesn't say anything different. That's the only thing I could say. Talks about the fat. Here again, this is what's put on the altar. In the peace offering, the blood of the animal was offered to God along with the fat, which was burned on the altar of sacrifice. The fat covers the organs and entrails and was not to be eaten, but was to be burned. The fat represented the choicest part of the offering. The fat belonged to God and had to be offered in sacrifice. I disagree with the fat as the. I don't eat. Grandpa Brooks would eat that fat. Ooh, nasty. He'd have steak and he'd have much fat. Boy, he'd chew that up. And I know the fat makes it, the ribeye good, makes it juicy and stuff to have it marbled like it. I ain't eating no fat by itself. That's just nasty to me. So I wouldn't want that. But they did say that that's part of it, why they did that, because it was the choices. They're presenting the best to God, is what they're trying to say. The animal's fat from the different parts of the cut up sacrifice pleased God. It was a pleasant aroma. It says fat was considered to be the prime portion, giving flavor and moisture to the meat. Fat's the stored energy of the animal. It's a way of offering one's energy and work to God. There's no mention made of what to do with the meat portion, the rest of the animal. This is because the meat portion was to be shared with part given to the priest and part given to the one who brought the offering. It's not stated here in this particular set of scriptures, but it said that this is what it's assumed, just like some of the grain offering and some of the others, that they shared in it. And that makes sense if you're sharing with God, okay, that you're having this. So they take each portion a little bit to themselves. That one ate his portion of meat as a part of fellowship with God, normally with gathering of immediate family and extended family. So it's much like the Passover, what we kind of know of today. And again, it points out the sweet aroma. The first 3 offerings, the burnt, the grain, and the peace offering, it's not used of the sin offering or the trespass offering. The idea is that in the first 3, the fire brings out the aroma. In the last 2, the fire destroys it. And we'll get into that in a little bit in the next scriptures. Going on 6, 7, and 8, Sister Iris, can you read those for us?
And if his offering for a sacrifice, let me start over. And if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offering unto the Lord be of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offer a lamb for his offering, then shall he offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation, and Aaron's sons shall sprinkle the blood thereof round about upon the altar.
Okay. So this is very same. before it was a heifer, but if they can be a cow, male or female. Now it can be a sheep, male or female. And it's one of those things, it's what you can afford, as we said before, but it's also what they had. They had more sheep, it seemed like, than they had. But just looking at how much they offered before, they had 20,000 bullocks, 120,000 sheep. That's a pretty good herd of sheep just by itself. So that they had all that particular one for them. So they may have had more sheep offered as people kept them and tended sheep more than they did cattle, because cattle it's not cheap to keep cattle. So, Sister Bertha, 9, 10, and 11 continues on.
And he shall offer the sacrifice of peace offering, an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And the fat thereof and their whole rump, it shall be he shall take off hard by the backbone, and the fat that covereth the innards, and all the fat that is upon the innards, and the two kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall be taken away, and the fruit shall burn it upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire to the Lord. You can't have a weak stomach back there.
That's what he was saying, Brother Epperson was saying. You want to do that. The blood and the fat just kind of gets nasty. It's kind of like some of those shows, I don't know if you're watching on television, some of them are, one in particular that I watched, he was a police officer, but he'd have to go down to the medical persons that was doing the autopsy, and anytime they cut up a man, some people are like that, even their own blood. They can't take it. It's just one of those things. But here the procedure was much the same as it was for the cattle, except it does mention the whole tail. Because on the sheep, the tail is primarily, at least back then, and maybe not so much now, it was predominantly fat, it says. The portion of the animal is considered a delicacy and could weigh as much as 60 pounds. So their sheep is pretty heavy on the tail side, is what they're saying. Larger and better than what we see today, it says. And it's considered a delicacy in Palestine. And here it calls the fatty lobe instead of the caul. The fatty lobe attached to the liver. Among certain neighboring tribes of Israelites, the liver was used as divination rites. Possibly this was why the Jewish legislation required it be burnt, because it is also true that, like the fat, this particular part of the liver, referred to as the appendage, was considered a delicacy and therefore appropriate to be set aside for God. They didn't, again, want any mix-up with the other countries that was there that would take it and they would eat that portion. So in their representation, that goes to God. They don't have any portion of it when they're making their sacrifice. And all of this, it says on the next one, the idea was that it was God's food, his portion of the sacrifice. The family that bought the peace offering would eat their portion, and this portion belonged to God in a meal that they shared together. And then it goes on in 12, 13, and 14, 15, 16. Brother Harold, you want to read those?
12, 13, 14?
15, 16, yeah, it's the next section. Starts on page 13, sorry.
You called me, I was trying to sleep.
What page you say that's on?
It's on 13 is what mine says.
12, 13, 14?
Yeah, and then it goes to the next page.
Oh, okay, it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, excuse me. I
No,
thought
it's
I
all right.
lost her for a second.
No, that's all right.
All right. And if his offering be a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of it, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle the blood thereof upon the altar round about. And he shall offer thereof his offering, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord, and the fat that covereth the innards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by thy flanks, and the caul above the liver and the kidneys, it shall be taken away. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor. All the fat is the Lord's.
So, here again, just like the previous offering, you could do a sheep or a goat. It didn't matter. Some had goats and some had sheep. Like I said, they raised them. Didn't talk about too much about the tail because the tail on a goat ain't very big, much at all. But again, the fat is. One of the reasons why, again, they talk about this is the fat is essentially stored energy. Okay, that's what fat is. It's when it's called upon, if you in an animal, you can use like a camel. Everybody always talks about the water in the hump. Well, the hump isn't water. It's much fat. And that camel can go, I was listening the other day, it's like, we can go like 3 days without water. They can go like a month or some crazy number like that. And then eating, they can go a lot longer. And I may be wrong what it is, but it is a long time. Like if it's 3 days for us, it may be a week for them or 2 weeks. And then they can go a long time without eating just because they have the fat stored up for them. Now, it can physically shrink too. They've shown that, as it goes by, the hump will go down, and then once they get back and revive themselves, they'll get it again. Because they do drink a lot of water. When they drink a ton of water. That's what they say. So all the fat is the Lord's. Verse 17 is the end of this one. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout your dwellings that ye eat neither the fat nor the blood. This is reinforcing what the Canaanites and some of the others in the Palestine were doing, because they would eat the fat, they would eat the blood, they considered it, part of it. Now that I don't think this applies to them. They wouldn't eat the blood at home if they killed an animal. They would still dress it down, but they might have the fat there. But typically, they would make the fat into the wax and the candles and stuff like that. That's what I understood. A perpetual statute throughout your generations. It's used 17 times in Leviticus. So it's telling them that all these are set up. And why he goes over these, he just doesn't say, and the same thing for goats. He goes through the whole thing again just because it's a repetition of what it is. They want to keep them away from the pagan people, what they do, and it's from where they came from Egypt, and also in that area, in Palestine. And they wanted to recognize that the life and the blood are strongly connected. So they want to keep that separated. They're not going to try to, like the other countries around them, that they're going to eat that and they will gain strength for that. Any questions on that? Like I said, it was kind of short, so we'll jump into 4. You can ask questions later if you want to. Huh? Yes, it does. And Christ's sacrifice was very gory. I mean, he was beaten to a pulp, basically. It was so, they could, in one place it said they could probably see the bones in the back of his back, the ribs.
I was thinking the very same thing when it was mentioning all the bloodiness and stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's just terribly, gory. Verse 1 in chapter 4. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them, It says the idea is not so much of an accidental sin, but a sin committed by a person whose life is lived in general obedience and surrender to God. The contrast is between sins of human frailty and sins of outright rebellion. It's a lot like when we talk about the unpardonable sin. If somebody is totally rebellious against it, and we saw it at the mountain when the people started rebelling against God, that was just totally, that they knew it was sin, but they still did it. But they were so fresh from Egypt, they had, even though they'd promised God and they'd seen all the plagues and they'd seen how they were delivered, the sea split open and all the armies of Egypt, was wiped out, and then the cloud by day and the fire by night followed them for for 40 years. But up on the mountain, it didn't take very long before they turned away from God. And that's what he's trying to say the difference is. That this is not the outright rebellion. He said the root of the Hebrew word translated unintentionally has the idea to wander or to get lost. No one intends to get lost, but when it happens, you're still lost. You can't do anything. And if you're truly lost, somebody needs to come and get you, don't you? When Google gets you in a bad place, if you're on the maps, and it's done that before for me. We went one time when we went to a meeting I was going to in Virginia. We flew into Washington and rented a car and took it, and you had to drive from Washington to Virginia. Of course, Virginia is just right there. But on the map, and I knew no different, I just said, here's the place, got the address. Well, it was real easy to go from here to there. Well, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention because the map didn't show a lot of the terrain. And that was up a mountain and back down over a mountain there. Now, their mountains aren't real high, but it is a couple thousand feet, or whatever it was. I don't know what it was. And we had, I think if I remember right, it was, for some reason, they gave us a big SUV. And Darla and Daniel just like to have a heart attack. Darla more so Daniel. When we was going up, because it was in some places, it seemed like it was just a one-way road. Up that mountain was curving back and forth and topped it. But we got there pretty quick. I mean, it took a while, but the other one, it had a long road. Well, I realized it went around the mountain. That's what they did and came back to it. So, but that's just one of those things that I unintentionally, I got lost. I knew where I wanted to go, but I wasn't for sure. I'd never traveled that before. So, and we do that sometimes today. I know, again, when I was out, you get to a place, or when I was out in Kansas, working on the oil fields, the roads are dirt roads everywhere. They're all square, so you're usually pretty easy to go. Where to go up, go 4 miles, whatever. But if you daydream very much, and you look up, and all those fence posts look the same, and you don't have any sign of a town, and it's cloudy, the sun's not out, you're like, am I going north, south, east, or west? I cannot even tell, because I have to stop sometimes and say, okay, where was I heading? I was heading out to this place. Okay, that's east, so I keep going east. But I couldn't tell it, from what I just got confused, and it just, you don't realize, because when you top a hill, you'll see lights if you're at night. Oh, there's the town. Well, that's 10 miles away. Because that's Kansas. Because it's that far away for the next town. Oh, yeah, it's not over the hill. It may be over the hill, but so in the day, you ain't seeing those lights. It's a long way, so it's just a general, you're just going every which way. Anyway, that's my part. Leviticus 4:2 tells us the first time the word sin appears in Leviticus. And the Hebrew root of the word essentially means to miss. And a lot of times we say miss the mark. The same root is used in Judges 20 and 16 in describing men who could sling a stone and not miss. Okay? Remember that story when they were all had slings and they could hit it at so many stones paces or so many paces away? Peter contesting on the word translated sins, at the heart of its meaning is the notion of missing the mark or failure to attain something, to be out of harmony with someone, or not be in normal or right relationship with someone. In this case, it is God that has been harmed. Adam Clark quoted an Anglican litany that it may please thee to give us true repentance, to forgive us all our sins, negligences, and ignorances, and to endue us with the holy grace of the Holy Spirit to amend our lives according to thy holy word. John tells us one time, too, don't tell me that you haven't sinned, because if you have, you're lying, and that's a sin. So we it's one of those things, we're human, and we don't intentionally sin, but we do sin. And sometimes we try again, we have to try again. But because we have an advocate with the Father, we don't have to bring a sacrifice. He made the sacrifice for us. And it's not so much that, oh, I messed up again. You don't have to tell God that. I mean, you can. But He knows you try to do better and allow Him to guide us, to direct us, to see what we can do different. So, okay.
Well, there's one of them is a definition of sin is transgressing the law. And sometimes, probably as Christians, we're more guilty of it. It says to them that know do good and do not sin. Well, sometimes that can get real deep. Sure. You're not supposed to commit adultery. But what if the Holy Spirit prompts you to do something, but through your negligence or through your, in other words, ignorance, you don't do it. And God knows, He knows our heart.
Right. And that's the thing, I think, is learning to listen to Him and finding out that, oh, I did it my way and I messed up. So I guess I better do it. Do it the way you told me to do it, whatever it may be. Okay, the next one's a long one, 3 through 12, Brother Jefferson. Oh, I missed this, Janet, sorry.
If the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he has sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, and shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head, and kill the bullock before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall take of the bullock's blood, and bring it to the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for the sin offering, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, he shall take away, as it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar of the burnt offering. And the skin of the bullock, and all his flesh, with his head, and with his legs, and his inwards, and his dung, even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without the camp into a clean place. where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, shall he be burnt.
Okay? So what's different on this? They burned, yeah. But who's doing the burning here? The priest. Okay? This is talking about the priest. If the priest is anointed, if they do sin to the sin of the people, let him bring for his sin, which he has sinned, the young bullock. So the priest is the one that has sinned. Because they're a priest, that doesn't mean that, just like pastor, that they're not going to sin. Here, it's they sin, and they can't do their job if they have sinned. They have to get clean first. All that we talked about earlier, even when the temple was set up, when they first set it up. Now, if you talk about today, the sacrifices will be done again, okay, in the new temple, when they build a new temple. But before that happens, they have to go through the ritual of cleansing everything, cleansing the priest, cleansing all these things. And they had to do that before, too. And because of that, they can't come before it with sin. And that's very much like the same thing here. That's where they get a lot of this from.
Sort of like they're standing for them before holy God.
Right.
It's like even when Aaron or one of his sons went into the tabernacle, they had to, went into the holies of holies,
right.
They had to prepare their place. Because if they got in there and done something wrong,
or that they had sin when they went in, or anything, they drop over dead. Another thing that's different, they shall, and it says, and he, talking about the priest, shall bring the bullock to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. This isn't at the front of the court. This is at the tent itself, right at the front. So that's different. He brings it up there, and then they kill the bullock there. And the priest that is anointed shall take the bullock's blood and bring it to the tabernacle of the congregation, to the tent. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the veil. So he'd sprinkle it, and I'm assuming it hit the veil. So they sprinkled it 7 times.
Let's back up a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Now the priest that is bringing this offering as a sin offering, is he doing this himself, or did he give it to another priest? Is there another second priest that's doing it for him?
It appears to me that it's the person that did the sacrifice, did the sin.
Okay, so it's the one priest that's bringing the offering, doing everything himself.
Right.
it's preparation to make sure he has not.
Yeah. He can't do anything else. It's just like when they're preparing to go before and offer it for the people, they have to do something for themselves.
It's not but even when they went into the temple, in the holy place, and then the holies, they had a worship basin there, to where, and all of that, all ceremonial, okay?
Right.
But what it's doing, it's showing to me, okay, God's seriousness about sin, and the responsibility not only that the people have, but the preachers have, that the priests have, and God's serious about sin.
Yeah. So I think it's this one, because it continues on, does it on the veil, and then he takes some of the blood and puts it on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord. Now that's not the altar of the burnt offerings. That's outside the tabernacle. Okay? That's what he put on the horns there. This is inside the tabernacle in the holies. That altar of incense, that little square one that sits on the north side, it's about 1.5 by 1.5. That's what he's putting this blood on. So it is a little different than what we'd read earlier. And it says right here, which is in the tabernacle of the congregation, which is the tent. She had poured all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering. So then he goes back outside, or pours it out first, I'm not sure which one, down at the bottom of the big altar where they're burning, they're not burning the cow in this particular case, but where they have burned others. And it's right there at the door of the tabernacle where they're going in. It's right there by the tabernacle, the wash basin. And he's going to take all the fat, as we did before, of all those on the inwards, and the 2 kidneys and the fat on all the fat is taken off the bullock of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. So the fat's offered, but in this case, the skin and all the flesh, all the meat, is taken outside, is what it appears to me. Now we're going to read through here some in a little bit, and it may say something a little different. But that, because it's a sin offering, you don't participate in that. It's totally burned up. So in that section B there on page 3, it says, priests offer to the Lord for his sin a sin offering. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. According to Adam Clark, the word for sin is the same ancient Greek word used in the Septuagint to translate for the sin offering. Paul said that God the Father made Jesus Christ our sin offering. Here again, the hand is laid on the bull's head. It says it's an important idea of the sacrifice of a substitute. Spurgeon considered 2 aspects of this symbol. It was a confession of sin. It was a consent to the plan of substitution. It was acceptable of that victim in the sinner's place. It was a belief in the transference of the sin. It was a dependence, a leaning on the victim. And in the simplicity of the symbol, there was no preparatory ceremony. Nothing was in his hand. There was nothing to be done with the hand except to lay it. And there was nothing to be done to the man's hand. It's talked about a young bull. The sacrifice should be offered for the sin of the whole people. Leviticus 4:14. To note the heinousness of this priest's sin above others. So it's counting that when the priest sins, that's worse than the normal person. It's kind of what that's indicating. What do we get that today? We are all up in arms when we hear somebody, big pastor somewhere, sins. Jerry Falwell, Baker, all these people that have fell, they're human. I'm sorry, we're human too. Oral Roberts, all the Robert Richard, all those different people that we've seen, we've heard, they're ordinary people. And each and every day they could, have something come up in their lives, but God has made a way available to it today. Back then they had to go through this procedure. Today it's all taken care of course. But we have to recognize it ourselves and not continue on that path. Our Lord Jesus is like the firstling of the bullock, the most precious thing in heaven, strong for service, docile in obedience, as one willing and able to labor for our sakes. He was brought as a perfect victim, without spot or blemish, to suffer in our stead. And that's exactly the way the bull was when they brought them. In contrast to the sacrifices for unintentional sins for others, the blood of the sacrifice for the priest was brought into the tabernacle itself for applications to various places in the tabernacle. This shows, in some sense, the sins of the priest were regarded as more serious. And it's one of those things they should know better. That's the way we view it. Talked about the blood on the veil, sprinkling it 7 times. The 7-fold sprinkling was part of the Day of Atonement ritual, and we'll get to that in Leviticus 16. And also the purification of the leper. We'll see that in chapter 14. And upon the dedication of the altar in chapter 8. Whether the blood fell on the veil or not, we're not certain, but we have good reason to believe that it was cast upon the veil itself. The veil, which was made of costliest tapestry, would thus by degrees become more and more like a vesture deep dipped in blood. And that's what Christ will be as he comes back and reigns on the earth.
Well,
Talks about.
So whenever they sprinkled this blood, you're saying that it just continually stayed there and got worse and worse and worse with every time that they.
Now we got to realize that after this is the temporary tabernacle. This was from the time until Solomon erected a temple. Okay, so that's going to be, that probably did everything all over again. New veil, the tent's gone. It's a temple now, but still there's the curtains. And so that one would be 20,000 bulls. No, that's not a sin offering, but a lot on it too.
Plus the tabernacle, the tent was tore down once. I mean, it was moved once in a while, not
Once in a while, not that often. Right.
Often, but it was moved
Right.
to keep up with the people.
And I don't know if I think they used new stuff when they brought it, because it may have been lost in the time that they had. I have to go back and think about that. I don't know if it's still there or not. But that's what they're saying, yes. Question? Yeah, it's not now. It will get to stinking, that's right. Well, with everything burning and everything else, it can't stink too much more. I don't think.
Spices were so,
They needed the incense.
They
They needed that incense going all the time. It's kind of like going in the fish market down here. I like to eat there, but oh man, as soon as you step in there, it's nasty.
I hope this fish is all fresh.
It's all fresh or something. I don't know what it is. And talks about the fat, again, talking about it. And that the bull's hide and its flesh was burned on wood with fire. The valuable hide and the meat of the bull were burnt outside the camp, along with the worthless parts of the bull. It could not be offered to God, but it was burned as if it were a worthless thing. This had to be done outside the camp to show the effects of memory of this sin were removed from the people. So it was taking all the selfish motives and everything of that sin offering and taking it all the way out.
I wonder if there was a time you said of Christ suffering outside the gate.
It could be. Could be. Very well. Okay, now, Brother Everson, Leviticus 13 through 21, chapter 4.
And if the whole congregation of Israel, through ignorance, and the things be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which should not be done, are guilty. When the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the congregation shall offer a young bullock for the sin, and bring it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before the Lord, and the bullock shall be killed before the Lord. I don't see how they got anything to do.
Really? They was doing it all the time, seemed like.
And the priest that is anointed shall bring it of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall dip his fingers in some of the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, even before the veil. And it shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar, which is before the Lord, that is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour out the blood at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take all his fat from him and burn it upon the altar. And he shall do with the bullocks as he did with the bullocks for a sin offering. So shall he do with this. And the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock, his sin offering of the congregation.
So here it comes back to what you was asking before, if it was the priest or if it was now, if the congregation, if the whole congregation, this has to be done. And it's very similar to what was done if it was a priest, except now the whole congregation, the elders have to get involved. They have to put their hands upon it, and they have to do all these things to make this sacrifice. It's still a sin offering. It's to cover for the whole congregation, this particular one.
Do we have any instances, for examples, what would be a whole congregational sin?
I mean, we could think of it, but I don't think anything's pointed out per se like that. To me, it's like when they started going off and, cast off your gold, and out, Aaron said, out walked a golden calf. Imagine that. I threw it in the fire. To me, that's intentional. That's not unintentional. I mean, they set out to do that. The unintentional, to me, I think, and I don't know if it's for the congregation, but when Moses struck the rock, when he should have spoke to it, because he was so agitated by the people, that may be what it is. We don't have, nothing has told us that. What this particular sin is.
Who had to furnish the bullock?
In this particular case, I don't really know.
Some rich rancher.
I think that I think the priests, they did have their own cattle too.
Well, if it's the whole congregation, then how are you making the whole congregation pay somewhat of a price or whatever?
Well, I think what's happened is because they've gotten some of the meat, the priests, they've gotten some of the hides, they've gotten all this, they go and buy from someone. They pay for it. So it's out of the priest's pocket. But it's for all the congregation, because all those was brought in too. I'm not real sure how that's done or why it was in particular.
I just hadn't read anything, or if I did, it didn't soak into me.
No, I didn't either. As I was going through this and reading different commentaries, it really didn't say anything about that, who provided it.
Well, I imagine the congregation had to,
Yeah, somebody on the congregation did, but
elders.
I'm thinking that as they went through, and later on we'll hear about all the different offerings, the tithe offerings and things that they're giving, some monies were taken out for that particular and paid someone. So one person's not giving the cow or giving the bullock. And here again, it talks about the laying on of hands. Talks about, it shall be forgiven them. This is the wonderful assurance. There is forgiveness when we come to God as he commands and receives atonement as he directs. This promise is even greater under the new covenant, which is 1 John 1.
I like that part where it says this laying on the hands does not appear to have been a mere touch or contact.
No.
But in some places of the scripture has the meaning of leaning heavily.
Leaning on it. Mm-hmm. Because the sins are weighty. We have to transfer, something. It's kind of like whenever you're making an imprint, a hand imprint or something, you have to push down on it to give it. So I'm going to read the last couple that's here. Leviticus 4:22 through 26. The sin offering for the ruler of the people, whenever the ruler of the people sins, okay? When a ruler has sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of, boy, that would take off everybody here. All our, anyway, go on.
Well, this don't take place in worse.
That's right. Against any of the commandments of the Lord, his God, concerning things which should not be done, and is guilty. Or if his sin wherein he has sinned come to his knowledge, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of the goat and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall take the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, now not the incense, and shall pour out his blood at the bottom of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all the fat upon the altar as the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven. Now, they're not given as many specifics in this one, but it's much like the others. What's left, that all the fat is just burned up, and they take the animal outside and burn it all. Okay? It says probable that this people, it's the term they call Nasi, which means ruler. It's probably any person that is meant to hold any kind of political dignity, though the rabbis said generally understood it as the king. Okay? Up until that time, they didn't have a king, so it was the judge or the ruler or whatever they had. It says we can't specifically deal with sins until we know we have committed them. When we do become aware of those sins, we are responsible to confess them and deal with them in light of God's sacrifice, ultimately fulfilled in the sacrificial death of Jesus on the cross. And he is bringing the sin offering was lesser than the priest or as a nation of the whole. It wasn't a bullock, it could be a goat. This demonstrates that the ruler was not greater than God, okay, or the people as a whole. After the ruler laid his hand on the head of the goat, the animal was killed, its blood was drained, and the blood never came into the tent of meeting, as was the case of the sin offering for a priest, or the people as a whole. The blood was wiped on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and the remaining blood was poured at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. And then the fat was burned up. Then 27 through 35. And if one of the common people sin through ignorance, while he does somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord, concerning things which ought not to be done, and be guilty of, or if his sin which he has sinned come to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he hath sinned. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. And the priest shall take the blood thereof with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat is taken away from the sin offering of peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar for a sweet savor unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven. And if he bring a lamb for a sin offering, he shall bring it a female without blemish. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay it for a sin offering in the place where they kill the burnt offering. And the priest shall take the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat of the lamb is taken away from the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn upon them upon the altar, according to the offerings made by fire unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for his sin that he hath committed, and it shall be forgiven him. So here it comes to the common person. And this is more that we see when they come for the different festivals, I think, and all that things. That's, again, it's unintentional. Something that they find out that something has happened, so they're bringing a sacrifice to it. That's not during all the festivals. There are additional festivals that come up, but this is when it happens sometime, when they can come and bring it to the tabernacle.
So is this the first place that talks about it has to be a female?
Well, it has to be. The others, some of them, it could be, back and forth. It can be male or female in some of the offerings, but this is the one that has to be a female. To me, again, it's going in lesser degrees. You got the bullock that represents the congregation or the priests, and then the goat with the male, and then it's come down to the last one is a female for the particular one. Now, that doesn't mean it's lesser, it's just, it can continue to happen. I mean, not after it's killed, but it's will raise additional sheep, but it's not the instigator, it's not the male, okay, that could progenate a lot more, if you get what I mean. I'm not saying it's lesser per se, but it is in there, because they have a lot of female sheep. Does that make sense?
Well, I just found it interesting that it specified
Mm-hmm.
female here.
That's why as it goes through each one of these, they will repeat it, but some of them are just a little bit different for the particular reasons. And it is pretty critical, and I think that's why it was brought out that way. That it was because it was for the common individual person. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out.
We appreciate you, what you do.
We'll
We'll
continue
find
on.
this week.